So let's look at this concept of the absolute value. Okay, so we write the absolute value of x as x in between these two bars here. That means I'm taking the absolute value of x. What does that actually mean? Before we actually do anything with that, we want to make sure that we simplify anything inside the absolute value symbol. Okay, we simplify anything inside, and then after that, the final result becomes positive. The final result becomes positive. Let's look at examples to see what I actually mean. So, if we want to evaluate the following here, I've got the absolute value of 5. Okay, so 5 is already fully simplified. And then I want to make sure that the final result is positive, and 5 is already positive, so my answer is just 5. Okay. We've got negative 5 here now. Now this is already simplified, but it's a negative number, it's less than 0. And the absolute value symbols mean that I want to make sure that the final result is positive after I've applied them. So this is just going to become 5. Okay, I've got the absolute value of 2 minus 8. Okay, so I want to make sure I simplify this first. Okay, so 2 minus 8, that's just going to be negative 6. Okay. And now I realize that negative 6 is negative, so I want to make sure my result is positive. So after I apply them, I get 6. And it doesn't actually matter what's inside or outside the absolute value signs. I want to keep doing what I'm doing. I want to make sure I've simplified everything. So absolute value of 22 is positive, I just write that. And here I've got negative 3. So what I want to do here first, I'm going to apply the absolute value. So negative 3 will become positive 3. But I want to keep this the index here, so it's still squared, which just becomes 22 plus 9, which is 31. And we can even get some more complicated examples here, right? Still the same idea. I want to simplify everything inside the absolute value signs, and then I want to make sure that the result after I apply the absolute value is positive. Okay, so let's look at this one. So I've got 2 multiplied by 1 plus 4. So remembering BODMAS, I want to do everything inside the brackets first. So 2 multiplied by 1 plus 4 is just 5. That's all squared. Minus 3 multiplied by 4 minus 8, which is minus 4. Okay. Now 2 multiplied by 5 is 10. And 10 is very positive, so I can apply the absolute value. I'm going to change it. It's 10 squared. I'm going to keep the indices, sorry. And then I've got 3 multiplied by negative 4, which is negative 12. And I want to apply the absolute value here, which means that this actually becomes positive, doesn't it? So after simplifying this, 10 squared is just 100, minus, this becomes 12. And that's just going to equal to 88. Okay, but how does this actually work? Well, one way to think of it is taking the absolute value. Taking the absolute value is kind of similar to looking at this number line. Okay, and so this is the positive side, this is the negative side, this is 0. And what we're actually looking at is how far away a number is from 0. Because if I look at, let's say, 2, I know that the absolute value of 2 is just 2. It's 2 units away from 0. And the same idea with the absolute value of negative 2. I know that that's just going to be 2. And if you look at negative 2 on the number line, it's 2 units away from 0. Okay? So that's the idea with what we're actually doing. But when we get to some more complicated examples, that definition doesn't actually work as well. So we want to introduce a new one. That works fine when we're evaluating or finding answers to something. But when we start working with algebraic expressions, or any time that there are a lot of pronumerals involved, we want a more kind of robust definition. That's where this comes in. So it might look a bit complicated, but I'm just going to explain it. So the absolute value of x equals to x when x is greater than or equal to 0, or minus x when x is less than 0. Okay, so all that's saying is if it's positive, if x is positive, and x is any expression inside the absolute value, if that's positive, we leave it as it is. We leave it as it is. If it's actually less than 0, we want to make sure it becomes positive. And the way you can make a negative number become positive is actually multiplying it by -1. Right? Let me look at this example back here. Okay, so 2, which is inside our absolute value, that's positive, so that's going to stay as 2. But this -2, that's less than 0. So how can we turn that into a positive number? Well, if I multiply -2 by -1, I'm just going to get 2 again. So if we come back to here, we really want to look at the general case. So the absolute value of a when a is greater than or equal to 0. So a could be anything, except we know it has to be either positive or 0. So using my definition up here, I know that this is just going to equal to a. Now, let me give you another scenario. What about when a is less than 0? This means that a is negative now, right? And so in this case, I know that I want the final result to become positive, but a is negative at the moment. So in order to turn into a positive value, I need to make sure that's going to be equal to -a, okay? And we can take this even further. So I've got a plus 1. Something like this, when a is greater than or equal to 0. So I know that a plus 1 is already positive. So all that's going to be is a plus 1. But what about this one here? When a plus 1, sorry, this should be a plus 1 there. A plus 1 is less than 0, okay? When a plus 1 is less than 0. I want to make sure that the final result becomes positive after I apply the absolute value, okay? So in order to do that, I'm going to multiply everything inside my absolute value by -1. So that's just going to be equal to -a plus 1, which is equal to -a minus 1. One more example. They might ask you something like this. Write the expression without absolute value signs. Write the expression without absolute value signs. What does that mean? Well, it's similar to what we were looking at before. It's just realizing that you can have two scenarios when you have an expression like this inside an absolute value. The first scenario is that whatever is inside of the absolute value is positive or equal to 0. So that's when x plus 5 is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, and remember, if the expression inside the absolute value is positive or equal to 0, we just leave it as it is. Okay. The other scenario is when x plus 5 is negative. Okay, and when x plus 5 is negative, we want to turn that into a positive value. Okay, and what we can do in order to do that is multiply it by -1. Okay, multiply by -1, and when I expand these brackets out, I get -x minus 5. And that's all you need to do. So an absolute value turns whatever expression is inside the symbols into a positive value.